Rorschach Journal, October 12, 1985. Tonight, a comedian died in New York. With this sentence begins one of the film comics that has become a true cult for the fans, Watchmen. The film was directed in 2009 by Zack Snyder, the director of several DC Universe film comics, and is the film adaptation of the comic book miniseries of the same name by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, winner of a Hugo Award for Best Science Fiction Film. The series showcases original characters in a uchronic reality outside the DC universe. The innovative feature that differentiates Watchmen from the genre comics that preceded it is that it presents superheroes in their human and everyday aspect, with their ethical and personal problems, rather than in their extraordinary and adventurous aspect, deconstructing the archetype of conventional superhero. The film, likewise, succeeds very well in generating the atmosphere of the comics, although, as often happens with film adaptation of books and comics, inevitably some elements are lost or completely changed. For this reason, Alan Moore opposed the making of the film from the outset, stating that he refuses to see his name juxtaposed with any film inspired by his comics, and that he did not intend to see it made should it nevertheless be made. Gibson, on the other hand, collaborated with Snyder on the production. In an interview, Moore stated that he did not want to see his name credited in the film titles, repeating an attitude he has previously held for other film adaptations of his works, such as V for Vendetta, From Hell, and The Legend of Extraordinary Man, from which he has publicly dissociated himself. In the biographical book Alan Moore Biographic by Gary Spencer Milledge, we learned that back in 1989, producers Joe Silver and Terry Gilliam asked Moore what he thought about making a Watchmen film, and even in that occasion, he reiterated that the idea was not feasible, that Watchmen was meant to be a comic book and would have not worked as a film. The events narrated begin in 1939. In response to the increase in mass criminal actions, the Minutemen group of mass vigilantes was formed, and decades later, the similar Watchmen group. Their existence, however, drastically influenced the events of history. Dr. Manhattan, a clear reference to the Manhattan Project, and the only true Superman endowed with near-divine powers that transcend human comprehension, helped the United States win the Vietnam War, enabling Richard Nixon to be re-elected several times in the following years. The existence of Dr. Manhattan provides the US with a strategic advantage over the Soviet Union, which has been threatening to escalate the Cold War into a nuclear war since 1980. At the same time, the growing anti-Watchmen sentiment reached its peak when, in 1977, under the slogan "Who watches the Watchers?", private crime fighting was declared illegal by the Keeney Decree. While many members of the Watchmen retired, Dr. Manhattan and the comedian operate as government agents, and the mysterious mass vigilante, Rorschach, continues to operate illegally in the slums. The last mentioned wears a mask that is a reference to the Swiss psychiatrist Hermann Rorschach, author of the famous test that bears his name, consisting of templates covered with black or polychrome ink blocks that the patient must interpret. In 1985, a government agent, Edward Blake, is murdered in his home. Investigating the murder, Rorschach discovers that the victim was actually the comedian, speculating that the mysterious murderer might be someone who wants to eliminate ex-vigilantes. Rorschach then tries to warn his retired teammates, his old partner Daniel Draper, aka Nightowl II, then Dr. Manhattan, and his lover Laurie Jupiter, aka Silk Spectre II. Draper remains skeptical, but does not disregard the hypothesis that there might really be someone intent on eliminating the retired vigilantes. He then goes to the multi-billionaire entrepreneur and former vigilante Adrian Veidt, aka Ozymandias, the smartest man in the war, who remains worried, rejecting the theory and suspicion put forward by Rorschach. After the comedian's funeral, Dr. Manhattan is accused in front of the press of having given cancer to his ex-girlfriend and others who stayed with him after the scientific accident that gave him superpowers. Troubled by the accusations, the almighty Dr. Manhattan moves, apathetic and angry, into exile on Mars, giving the Soviet Union a great opportunity to invade Afghanistan in his absence. In this scene in the film, we have the first two differences from the comic. The first is that Jenny, Manhattan's ex-girlfriend, in the comic does not appear in the studio. Instead, Manhattan finds out about her illness from an interview is shown. Snyder later stated that in the film, showing only an interview would not have emotionally involved Manhattan, and consequently opted to include Jenny as the trigger for Manhattan's remorse. The second difference lies in the fact that in the comic book, it is not Manhattan who teleports himself out of the studio, but rather him teleporting all the journalists outside. Meanwhile, while investigating the possible perpetrators of the comedian's murder, Rorschach is arrested. He is later freed by the Hole and Silk Spectre, who, soon afterwards, confronts Manhattan on Mars. During his stay in prison, Rorschach interacts with a character who plays a marginal role in the film, but has a really fundamental role in the comic, especially in helping the audience understand Rorschach's psyche, namely the psychologist Malcolm Long. Long tries to dig as much as possible into Rorschach's past to understand the reason for his obsession with justice at any cost, but ends up digging too deep. After understanding Rorschach's real intentions and realizing that he's not dealing with a madman, he decides to resign from his role as a prison psychologist, and later becomes so taciturn and reclusive that his wife decides to leave him and throw him out of the house. Returning to the film, after being teleported to Mars by her ex-lover, Laurie asks him to save the world from the nuclear holocaust, but Manhattan replies that he no longer cares about the human race, as Laurie, his only link to it, has left him. He also reveals to her that although he possesses near divine powers, he is by no means a god, and has never really been able to prevent the nuclear escalation between the Soviet Union and the US. His role as a natural deterrent to nuclear conflict, therefore, was only just a ploy set up by the US government as an element in their Cold War. To make his point clear, Manhattan digs into Laurie's mind, discovering that she is in fact the daughter of the first Silk Spectre, Sally Jupiter, and the comedian. The girl's despair at this revelation causes Manhattan to rediscover his interest in the human race, because of the improbable sequence of events that lead to the birth of the very person he loves so much, and so he decides to return to Earth with Laurie. Meanwhile, investigating the conspiracy, Nighthawk and Rorschach discover that Vade is responsible for everything. Rorschach notes down his suspicions in his journal, which he then leaves at the publication office of the New Frontiersman, an extreme right-wing magazine of which he is an avid reader. Rorschach and Nighthawk reach Ozymandias' hideout in Antarctica and confront him. Here we run into yet another difference between comic and film. Indeed, in the comic, the journey to Vade's hideout is long and winding, while in the film, the two park their vehicle in front of the hideout. It is also worth mentioning the vehicle that is used by the Nighthawk. His name is Archie, and he is the flying aircraft that is also used to rescue Rorschach from prison. In that scene in the film, we do not hear the air-shattering scratching that deafens the guards and prisoners. As Snyder has also confirmed, the old jet has the deafening devices, but we don't hear them in the film. In the DVD extended edition, however, when the three are escaping from prison, there is a scene at the top of the roof in which Dan says that he had to turn off the devices so they will have little time to escape. So at least a reference exists. There is also an interesting curiosity concerning the Italian adaptation of Archie. In the Italian dubbing of the film, the flying vehicle is nicknamed Archie. Nigel himself explains that it is a diminutive of Archimede, the role of Merlin the Wizard in the film The Sword in the Stone. However, in the Italian version of the Disney classic, the old Archimede is renamed Anacleto. In the Italian version of the comic, he is correctly nicknamed Cleto, so this is probably either a lack of research by the Italian translators or simply an oversight. But returning to the film, Ozymandias confirms that he is behind all the events of the conspiracy, the mastermind behind the assassination of the comedian, the forced exile of Manhattan, and the plot to frame Rorschach, and that he has even staged his own assassination attempt to shield himself from suspicion. He further explains that his plan is to unify the US and the Soviet Union and prevent a nuclear war, but to do so, he intends to destroy some cities of the world, simulating Manhattan's power. An inevitable fight thus begins, but ends with a disconcerting revelation. Vade's plan began the very moment the two vigilantes arrived in Antarctica. Silk Spectre and Manhattan arrive at the ruins of New York and realize it must be all Vade's fault. They then teleport to the Antarctic base of Ozymandias. Here, Vade unsuccessfully attempts to kill Manhattan. Forced to surrender, he shows the group the latest news on TV, in which Nixon, confirms that the US and the Soviet Union have allied against the new common enemy, Dr. Manhattan. The heroes realize that revealing the truth to the world will ruin this new difficult peace. Rorschach, unwavering in his virtuous integrity, however, does not intend to keep silent. The masked vigilante has a final dialogue with Dr. Manhattan, in which the latter tries to dissuade him, but Rorschach makes it clear that he will never compromise, not even in the face of Armageddon. Manhattan, therefore, has no choice but to kill his former colleague for the good of the war. In the film, the entire scene is observed by the O, who, furious at the death of his one true friend, attacks Wade, who keeps defending his actions, while Dan insists that he has only deformed humanity, as a peace built on lies is destined to inexorably collapse, leading to far worse consequences. In the comics, however, Dio remains inside Ozymandias' hideout for the entire duration of the confrontation between Manhattan and Rorschach, and thus does not witness his friend's death. Snyder went on to state that as their friendship in the film was very sweet, Dio would have probably wanted to witness the scene only to lose control and assault Wade in sorrow. Back in the rebuilding city of New York, Laurie reveals to her mother that she knows the truth about the comedian, and, finally embracing, the two women reconcile. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the New Frontiersmen, the editor complains that the peace between US and Soviet Union is not bringing any news to the newspaper, until a young employee finds Rorschach's journal with the whole truth in his hands. Rorschach Journal, October 12, 1985. Tonight, a comedian died in New York.